Hi, you guys, it's Sydney, and welcome to my Dear Diary. Rough start to the pod this morning, you guys, to be honest with you. I'm in some sweatpants and a sweatshirt because I really could not be bothered to get dressed. So I figured like maybe I should put on a little bit of makeup or at least put on a lip combo because I'm on Accutane and it just made my lips super pink. So I'm like, okay, let me do my lip routine because I know I'm going to be on camera. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I feel like a lip liner never makes it back home with you. I look around, not in my purse, nowhere to be found. I went out this weekend for a friend's birthday party and I must have lost it somewhere. This is the third one I have purchased. So I think I just need to cut myself off and never bring it out with me and just accept the fact that my lips will be bright pink and just call it a day. Honestly, life could be so much worse and these issues are minute in comparison to other things going on in the world. But yeah, no, that set me in a brief spiral, but we're back and we're ready to record. So let me just start with the elephant in the room. I know it has literally been almost a month since I put out that first podcast episode. We've only gotten one down. That's a little insane considering in that episode, I literally preached just putting on a product, not worrying about perfection. But here we are. I literally fell into the same traps that I typically fall into. I know there's that saying, something along the lines of perfection prohibits progress or perfection inhibits I don't know. You don't need the quirky line, but you get the point that if you get caught up in perfection, then you will not make significant progress. And that's exactly what I did. So here we are, not perfect today. This timing's not perfect. The setup isn't perfect, but we are just getting it done. So everyone, please hold me accountable as I work to hold myself accountable too. And you will have an episode from me every Wednesday. And the last thing I wanted to mention before we jump into today's topic and content is a story of, let's just say, hope. So a couple weeks ago, I was back in Cleveland and I was going to volunteer at a food pantry just to give back to my community. And my mom was going, and that's why I went. And it very much aligned with some impact initiatives I have going on at work. So I'm like, okay, this worked out perfectly. While I was en route, I was just having a day. It was just one of those days where everything just felt heavy and sad. I was just not feeling excited about life. Like everything just felt so dark and hopeless. And I was just complaining to my mom, not complaining, but more so expressing my feelings to my mom about how I just really want to transform my life. You know, the usual spiel. I feel like we've all gone through it, especially if you're around this age and looking to figure out like what life has in store for you and what your next steps look like. And my mom has probably heard this story time and time again. So maybe that's why she wasn't giving me the energy that I wanted. She's a very comforting person. I don't want to like discredit that because she is very supportive. But I just wasn't feeling like I was getting the affirmation that I needed. And also sometimes it's the messenger. Like if you hear something from someone 10 billion times, but then you get it from someone else, it might hit differently. I was just feeling really sad when I walked into this volunteer event. But immediately upon entering the premise, I met the coordinator of the program and she was actually so beautiful. Her skin was pristine. She had such good makeup. She looked great. And I'm not even one to overhype things. I will give credit where credit is due and she looked really good. My mom introduces me to her. I feel like everyone knows like that conversation, like, guess how old she is. And then you got to throw out some outrageous number because you're not going to guess the age. Because I know black don't crack, so I can clock an age pretty well. But I threw out like, oh, you look 60, huh? No, she was like 90. But in that conversation, she decides to give me some unsolicited advice. So she goes on to tell me that how she stays so healthy and happy and vibrant is by following like these three keys to life. It was kindness, inspiration, and passion. Those were like her three keys to life. And it was so funny because then we went on to have this whole conversation about how she really is committed to doing things that bring her happiness while also being a kind person, as well as finding her passions in life and really engaging in that. And I'm like, wow, I just love when people affirm things that I was thinking about. We even went on to discuss just careers very naturally in this conversation. She went on to kind of say that, and a job can be more than just a job. It can be a career and something you want to actually invest your time in. And that's something she really just encourages and tries to impress on young people because we are in charge of our own lives. Like that's basically what she said. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I was just talking to my mom about earlier today. Like it's so crazy. So for me, that was both motivating and just a feeling of like, wow, this is such a serendipitous event. Like I love finding signs in the everyday. So Some people might call it God, others may just call it signs. But whatever you believe, I think there is power in finding value in random everyday events that could mean something more. Because I mean, why not? Otherwise, it's just circumstance and just happens to you. I like to control the narrative and be like, this happened to me for a reason. That's just my thought process. So I'm encouraging you all to find the little moments and glimpses of hope in everyday life. So today we're unpacking the highs and lows of having high standards. I just want to explore if these high standards are empowering, isolating, or just blocking real life experiences that are fundamental to learning, or is it just truly the key to self respect? And there were two reasons why I wanted to talk about this. The first being, I feel like this is a self check because I've been told I have very high standards or I'm hard to please. I would reframe that and say I'm just very particular and know myself. But some people might debate if that's true. So I really want to check and see if this is something that I should continue to do within my life or if I should be a little bit more flexible. We can explore that today. And then the second thing was I have been watching this show called Farmer Wants a Wife. I think it's on Fox. And the show was already over. It wasn't like the best show you've ever seen, but it was entertaining for the time being. And there was one girl on there named Samantha who, in her relationships, had such clear, specific standards. And a lot of people I felt like on the internet were coming for her for having high standards. But I'm like, I bet I have high standards. And I kind of agreed with her messaging that like your standard is your standard. If it can't be met, that's fine. But I'm not going to settle for something below my standard, even if everyone else out there is like, well, that means you're going to be single forever. So after listening to the criticism about her on different podcasts, because the like guy she was dating has been really doing his media tour after the show, kind of coming for her, and like the hosts were coming for her too. So I really just wanted to explore, are high standards good or bad? Are they sustainable? And what is the impact of having high standards? So we're going to walk back in time and give you a little synopsis of my high standards because I feel like I knew who I was at an early age. But maybe I didn't know myself to a T, but I have always been a specific and particular person. Maybe an acquired taste. I don't know. You might even go as far as to say that. But I have always known what I liked and what I disliked, which I think has really informed my standards in life. Even when I was little, didn't like being dirty. I don't know if that's a standard or a preference, but didn't like that. I had very specific standards about how I wanted to look and also like the experiences I wanted to have and the things I wanted to engage in. So there were certain clothes that I knew I liked and certain colors that I liked over others. I feel like I just had a specific taste, and maybe it led to the side of like intolerant, which I hope I have learned and grown out of. But if I was placed in a scenario or in an environment that I did not like or did not meet my standard, I was more than happy to remove myself. And I think as time went on and I got older and was in middle school and high school, I feel like these standards just got even kind of higher. And I think sometimes I was labeled as like picky or dramatic for paying attention to things that others might have ignored or written off as not a big deal. That's just something that's been fundamental to me as a person. And even my sisters, I think they operate in the same way, especially when it comes to relationships and friendships. Things that weren't a big deal to other people were a big deal to us. And if you played me or did me dirty, I was quick with the cutoff and was more than happy to go my own direction than, in my opinion, settle for behaviors or people who weren't meeting my standards, which I think were more than okay to be met. And I don't know if that was a maturity thing. I wouldn't even go as far as to say that because some people, even today, like they aren't the confrontational type. They aren't the ones who need to like call out behaviors. They're okay with being around certain things. So I think it's just instead a way of knowing yourself because there's just certain things that I value and that I believe are fundamentals that must be fulfilled. Otherwise, I don't feel the need to be around you at all. To be honest, sometimes these standards would leave me alone or somewhat isolated. At least I always have my sisters, so that's a plus. But sometimes I wouldn't be with like the greater group. But I had long accepted that I would rather be put in those uncomfortable situations than be forced to accept the discomfort of being around people who aren't giving me the respect that I think I deserve. And I think it was harder to accept that back when I was in more insular environments. I went to smaller schools, so you're always kind of in a social bubble. And now like we're grown, so you could be alone and who gonna know, or you could be alone and celebrate that like you very well could live your own life, but I still think that's something that people have trouble doing. But these relationship standards have been pretty much drilled into me because if you know me, you have heard this quote time and time again, and that is go where you're celebrated, not tolerated. And that's something I just really uphold in my life. Even on a material level, I think I have specific standards. Again, that might come from my dad because he also has very specific expectations, I'd say. And one within travel, you can come for me if you want to, but I would prefer not to stay someplace that isn't up to snuff with where I live. And what I mean by that is if I'm paying to go on a trip, my accommodations need to match where I'm laying my head every night. Otherwise, I can stay home. And that's why I don't camp. Like, do I seem like a camper? Probably not. But that's why I don't enjoy those types of things. I don't enjoy backpacking. I was forced to backpack on an 8th grade trip, which, of course, great experience. Got to see New York City from a different perspective, and I'm sure I learned a lot of valuable things. Not that I can even remember what they are at this point in time. But now that I'm an adult, I don't have to spend my time being uncomfortable. So I can't tell if that's a good or bad thing, but those are some of the things that are off the top of my head. And the next is even food. Like there are so many restaurants that people love, but I'm not the type of person who wants to go somewhere if the place is slightly dirty or I don't like the ambiance or vibe. I'm gonna just sit this one out. I have heard like the saying that you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to grow. Like I mentioned, I've been on that backpacking trip. I've gone to camp. Well, not for long. I've been to camp for a little bit. Maybe it was a week, but even my mom got us a hotel room. We didn't camp outside, so we can blame the parents for setting these standards. But yeah, I don't know if you necessarily have to do those type of uncomfortable things in order to grow. Like I am not an expert on development, but I'm not sold on the fact that you have to spend your money to do something that you don't enjoy for the sake of being cultured. What I want to do first, though, is define the difference between a standard is a preference because I feel like those words are used very interchangeably. There is a fundamental difference, and I think it's important to understand that distinction so you can figure out what are actual standards in your life versus actual preferences and what can or should be shifted and what shouldn't. So I had to do some research, and this was coming from just Google and a couple of videos I watched to kind of inform this. A standard is a non-negotiable and it's value-based. It is the floor, the minimum of something that you will accept. Whereas a preference is a nice to have. It's a little more flexible and can be negotiated or compromised. So I'm guilty of mixing these up too, but I do want to be more cognizant of what those are, specifically when it comes to dating. That doesn't mean I'm going to change my standards, but I do want to be a little better at understanding why a standard is what it is in my personal life. And I also think it has to do with the framing too, so you can unpack why you have a certain standard. So for example, I prefer not to eat at hole-in-the-wall restaurants and want an ambiance. Not that a hole-in-the-wall is always dirty, but I like to be more comfortable in the spaces I'm eating at, so that's just kind of a thought. So the standard that supports this preference is cleanliness and the value of $1. This is just a reach. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So I want to spend my money in an informed way. And if I'm spending my money on an activity or experience, I want to experience something that I want to get on a daily. That's one. Honestly, I think that's pretty clear. That kind of all came together. The second is my standard is hygiene and cleanliness. And if the space isn't hygienic or it's not super clean, then I don't need to be there, regardless of how good the food is. So the point being is that while we go through this episode and you start to unpack and reflect on your own standards, try and make a distinction between what is a standard and what's a preference so you know that your standards are supported by values and shouldn't be shifted. If you're a person who has high standards, something I think that you need to be well aware of is that not everyone will meet them. I think there is a very real fear that people have about upholding certain standards, especially when it comes to relationship and career standards, of thinking that you will not meet your standard. But ultimately, I feel like we need to not come from that perspective and know that there are people out there and things out there that do meet your standards. So rather than lowering them, maintain the bar and be okay with being lonely or going through a period of transition or uncertainty so you can find something that matches your standard. Because I saw this video the other day and I honestly really did agree with it. I think it was well said. I'll insert it in this description. But it was a guy basically saying that if you compromise or just are okay with the areas of your life, ultimately in the end, you end up just hating your life. Like if I'm okay with my friends, like they're okay, but then also my job, I'm like, it's just okay, then what's great? And people are going to say, I know there are going to be people who think you can't always be wanting more, you can't always be wanting the best of the best, but I truly think you can. The combination of settling or allowing people or opportunities in your life that don't meet your standards are really going to weigh on you. And it is hard, but if you do find yourself in a period of transition, you have to remember that by removing the things that weren't serving you, you're leaving space for something even better that actually aligns with you to come in. And I think that's something that the girl, Samantha, I'll link her social media too, so you know who and what I'm talking about. But this is the Farmer Wants a Wife girl. Something that she articulated well too was that she was very much okay with being alone. So on the show, she ended up leaving it. But I think she realized that she would rather be flying solo than be matched with somebody who isn't up to her standards. And I personally firmly agree with that. But I do think there are a lot of people who are more willing to kind of shift their standards and preferences. And this isn't a critique on you. I just want you to kind of analyze your relationships and know that if you know deep down someone isn't meeting your standard, why are you okay with having them in your orbit? And what about you is making you feel like you can't be strong or powerful all by yourself? I feel like people quite often have their identities wrapped up within their social circle. Whereas when I've been forced to be alone, I have been forced to know that my identity is my own and my value comes from myself. So I'm kind of happy that I had those traumatic experiences in middle school and high school and college. So post grad, I don't have to live with that. But if you are like in a friend group that you feel like isn't serving you or isn't doing you any good, I honestly strongly advise that you just cut them off. And this isn't for trivial things. I'm just saying if they aren't meeting your mutual standards of like respect. And the same even goes for relationships, because as a Black girl who's lived in predominantly white environments and been in those spaces her entire life, I feel like I've never been able to center men because there were no men to center. And while I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, I would see my peers and know people who jump from relationship to relationship while I've just been single the entirety of that time. I wouldn't wish the loneliness and isolation that comes with being a minority in these environments on anyone, because it is so tough. But the one silver lining is I truly feel like I know myself as I've been forced to know myself. And that knowledge, I think, will help me in other areas of life. So there's no right or wrong way of doing it. And just because someone's been in 10 back-to-back relationships doesn't mean that they're happy with themselves. I'm just calling for us all to be honest and self-reflective and really do an audit of the people in our lives, because you are who you surround yourself with. So don't dim your light or lower yourself to meet other people. Find people who rise to the occasion. While you're doing this audit of your life and other people, you also need to do an audit of yourself, because this is where I think having high standards can be a problem. And that is if you are upholding other people to this high standard and have all these expectations for others, but you don't even meet them yourself, because then it turns into hypocrisy. So I wouldn't go as far as to say because you aren't meeting your standards, that means you need to remove them completely. But I would say before you are quick to point the finger, you should make sure that you're meeting the standards that you set or actively working to, because that actively working part is half the battle, because at least you recognize where you are falling short and are self-aware enough to try and better yourself. And that's something I'm still working on too, because there's a lot of areas in my life I know I need to improve, but I would love if the people around me had matched or exceeded. So I think it's honestly just a healthy balance of being motivated by the people around you, but also being open to having some sort of grace, especially if people are willing to work and strengthen their own personal relationships and standards with you. But what I really have come to learn that everyone's different for a reason. Your standards are quite literally your standards for a reason, and they don't have to be someone else's standard. As long as it's not negatively impacting you, you don't get to dictate what other people's standards are and what they should be. And I think we have to realize that everyone's coming from their own lived context, lived experiences. And I think, honestly, biological threshold, that might be the wrong word, but I'm just thinking everyone's genes are different. Like everything about people are different, is basically what I'm trying to say. So we aren't here to dictate what is wrong or right. We're just here to remain true to ourselves and uphold the standards that we set, as well as try and meet and exceed our own personal standards. So with that being said, if you have a standard that you feel like isn't being met by the people in your life, before just writing people off completely, and I know I was just saying I was quick with the cutoff, sometimes trying to be better about now is operating with more grace, I'd say communicate, because not everyone is going to be a mind reader. So open communication definitely is key. So if you're communicating with someone about a personal standard that you don't think is being met, and that person is more than willing to try and work towards that, then I think that's perfectly fine. And at the same time, you have to make sure that you're actively trying to do your part in fulfilling and satisfying other people's standards. So that's not just one way transactional. You can tell someone else what to do. So overall, I just think it's important to make sure you're holding yourself to the same standards that you expect. And if you aren't meeting them yet, just actively working towards them. And then also being communicative and letting people know what your standards are. Obviously, a conversation like these are my standards in my friendships isn't really necessary. Reading the room and being able to communicate when you're uncomfortable with something, as well as, I guess, model the behavior you want around you. So I think it would be fun to share a couple of my personal standards just so you know better what my standards look like. So I wrote a couple things down. I'm going to pull it up. The first category is friendship. And I feel firmly and strongly about these. One standard I firmly believe in is neutrality is sometimes worse than actually doing the action. I'm sure there's a better way of saying that, but I cannot stand neutrality, especially when it comes to me, because I want friends who don't play about me and support me. So if I'm with people and they're the type who aren't willing to take a stand when it comes to a black and white or right or wrong situation, then I'd rather not be with them at all. Because to me, neutral people are the real villains. That's just my personal opinion, because passiveness is just so against who I am as a person that it's hard for me to be around passive people. I'm not saying this is the standard that everyone needs to have. This is just my own personal standard. And I'm going to give an example because I watch too much TV. The video is going to cut out for a second because I was going to talk about an example from The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives on Hulu, but instead I'm going to change to something more relevant and something that actually gets me fired up, and that is Love Island USA. And if you are not watching, you should be watching because it's the show of the moment, even though it pisses me off every other episode. You need to be engaged in that cultural conversation. But I think there are two key examples of where neutrality is actually dangerous. It means that you are not a good friend if you are neutral. One, there is a girl named Olandria on the show, and she is friends with another girl named Amaya. Olandria is dating Taylor. Amaya is dating Austin. Amaya and Austin have been having some problems, and Olandria, being that she is close with Amaya, has been in conversations with Amaya multiple times, kind of about her struggles with Austin. But at the same time, Olandria has been in conversations with Austin about his problems with Amaya. He wants to end the relationship altogether and is somewhat mean in his comments. Being that Olandria's boyfriend, I'll say just for the intent of this conversation, Taylor is kind of friends with Austin since all the guys are pretty close to each other. She is kind of just privy to Austin's conversations. She's not an active contributor, but she's also not shutting it down. So for me, in order for Landria to be a good friend in this situation, she needs to be telling Amaya what Austin's saying, because Austin's literally thinking about ending the relationship. And you might say, oh, that's not her place. We're using it as characters of a show. Like, I don't know what these people are like in real life. We know that they could be victims of editing. But for me, my standard is I don't want neutral. So if she's not going to tell Amaya, I'd rather have her remove herself from the conversation entirely. Because I feel like sitting there silent is just co-signing the message. And again, that might be an extreme example, but if you even use it on a smaller level, it will make sense, at least in my opinion. And another even more severe example of neutrality being weaponized is Nick. So Nick on the show is friends with Jeremiah and Ace. Ace does not like Jeremiah in the slightest. He always has it out for him. He's always gossiping about him. He's being honestly just mean to him. And Nick tries to straddle both relationships. But in the end, I feel like straddling doesn't really work. He ultimately kind of engages in the bullying of Jeremiah behind Jeremiah's back with Ace and strategizes with Ace on ways to kind of take Jeremiah down. That sounds extreme, but it's a show where you win money at the end, so, you know. But at the same time, he still tries to be friends with Jeremiah. So Nick honestly is fake. This is an example of neutrality. He's not neutral. He's honestly just a villain. And again, disclaimer, I'm talking about these people in the context of the show. I don't know them in real life. I'm sorry. It's reality TV. It is what it is. We have to make our own conclusions. But the point being is, I need a friend who doesn't play about me. I need a friend who is going to stand up for what's right and wrong especially when it comes to our friendship, because I would do the same for them. And I'm not going to say I do it in every situation, but I am truly trying to be more vocal, both about my opinions and thoughts, and especially for standing up for the people around me who are good to me. And a last friendship standard, I want friends who are genuinely interested in me. So, an example is sometimes there are people who very much like to talk about themselves in conversation. I can call someone or be on the phone with someone and they only talk about themselves. I'm not the type who's going to jump in and be like, me, 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 me. But I do want a friend who shows a genuine interest and care in what's going on in my life, even if their life might have more going on at the time being. So I don't think this necessarily means that the person doesn't care about you. If someone doesn't care about you, they'll probably show you in other ways. But I don't want to just be an emotional vessel for someone else if I'm not getting that in return. Of course, if someone's in a negative experience, I'm more than happy to put my things to the side and help someone out. But I'm just saying I would love to have friends who are reciprocal. I would be willing to say to this person, hey, you never asked me about myself in the conversation. Let me tell you about my day, and just keep it pushing instead of like sitting someone down and having some grave, big discussion. Because I do think when you let things pile up, it just makes things worse instead of just calling things out in the moment. And if they are a little aloof or don't get the message, maybe say something in a little bit more clarity. I just am saying I want someone who's going to show a genuine interest in me, so it's not just me being the therapist, because that's happened one too many times for me. I'm like, I don't get paid enough. I don't get paid at all, actually. Those are just some of my friendship standards. I'd love to hear some of yours, but we're going to move on to the next category, and that is dating and relationship. This category is slightly difficult because as someone who's been single the entirety of my life, I have been told time and time again that I have high standards when it comes to dating. Sometimes people are saying that in a good way. Some people are saying that in a negative way. And I think people sometimes feel like those standards are keeping me single. And to some extent, maybe they are, but I'm not buying into the idea that I need to lower these standards to find my person. Instead, I think I should keep these standards, and it's actually just been a great weed out process. I just think people are far too easy to call you out for your standards when you're a person who's been single and say your standards are too high, you're hard to please, instead of accepting that some people just have high standards. And I think that if there are people out there who are getting their standards met, then that means it can exist for you too. And I am a strong proponent of not lowering them just so you can say you're in a relationship. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm settling in any area of life. I'm definitely not going to settle when it comes to being in a relationship. So some of my relationship standards in my head are like, is career driven, has a sense of style, family oriented. I think some of those might be like preferences that can be twisted into standards. Like the fashion one, like has a sense of style, I think can just be instead a standard of just is well groomed and has an interest in taking care of themselves. See, so some of these preferences I think are informed by standards, but those are just the thoughts that come top of mind. So I do think there's a way to maybe twist your preferences and relabel them as standards. I was thinking about this the other day because I heard somebody say on a podcast that a preference of being with a man who's 6 foot or above actually isn't a preference, it's a standard, and it's rooted in your biology, because back in the day, in the hunter-gatherer days, women needed someone to protect them. So if you were taller, you're able to do a better job of protecting them. So that was a standard that you would have to reassess today, but it's actually not your own fault. And that got me thinking, because logically that does make sense to me of like why that standard existed. I'm not sure on if that means we need to have that same standards today, but I do think there's a way to kind of twist your preferences and make them a standard. So ultimately, I do think you need to make sure your standards are values based, because instead of wanting someone who's like 6 foot to protect you, obviously someone can be a protector in so many other ways that are a little more relevant, a little more of the times. As I was researching, I came across this YouTuber named Darius Daniels, and I think he put to words what I've been feeling. He said, some people are categorizing some things as preferences that are really their standards. They're just not comfortable admitting this is my standards, but some people make you feel like including certain things in your standards is shallow. And I personally find this to be very true, relatable, because I have had in my life people say like your standards are so high. And I do think some people really try and force you to reassess your standards. out of a symptom of you being single rather than just accepting that some people are more than okay with being alone than settling for someone who doesn't meet their standards. And I also think there are real impacts to shifting your standards because other people tell you to. And he kind of identified that in his video. He was saying basically that people try and force something and conjure up feelings and affection for a person that are not authentic because they feel bad. I agree. And if you want a relationship to work, you need to get real. And I honestly so agree with that. And so I think my standard when it comes to dating is I'm not going to waste my time or someone else's time by going on a date just for the sake of it if someone's not meeting my standards, because I can clock some things right off the bat. So I don't think you need to lower your standards just to go on alone. The advice here is to make a list of your standards and preferences and identify the difference between the two. And I don't think you should have to shift your standards or lower them, especially if you exceed them. Like, I think you should stand firm and understand that you might have to go through a slight period of loneliness, but that just leaves room for the right person to come your way. And if other people are criticizing your standards, just remember they literally are your standards for a reason. And also sometimes, I'm gonna be honest, consider the source, because I have so many people try and give me relationship advice and tips, most times unsolicited. And what I found is that the people who I know in the happiest relationships, obviously I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but I'm telling you the truth. The people I know in the happiest relationships are not out here critiquing me and my standards, and they aren't out here giving me all this out-of-pocket advice either, coming from like a demeaning place. Because most of the ones who have done that, no longer together, or there were people who I wouldn't even tolerate. So there's a reason why I wouldn't be dating your person. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be happy with that person, because if they meet their standards, then by all means, like, I'm happy for these people. I'm just saying from my own personal experience, I have to consider the source, because people really do use their relationship as some sort of hierarchy when in actuality, I'm not over here crying every day about being single. I'd probably be crying more if I was wasting time. And the last category of standards that I wrote down were personal standards. And these might just be the most important standards of all, because arguably, I think you steer kind of your own life. And then if you aren't meeting your own standards, you're more susceptible to be around other people who aren't meeting your standards. So first thing I want to say is, when it comes to your own personal goals, I don't think they're too high. I just think your standards are too low. If I were to change my personal standards and altering what I want out of life, I do know deep down, even if I was to obtain whatever my readjusted standard is, I will always have a part of me wishing I had kept what my actual real standard is and worked towards that instead of settling. Because settling to me is just so painful. So some personal standards for myself are being unapologetic and being true to myself in all circumstances. I really do value authenticity, and I want to make sure I'm living life authentically. And I think along a similar line of authenticity and being unapologetic is kind of fueling my own creativity and always being a continuous learner. So I think that means engaging in activities that really bring me inspiration and passion and force me to be a little bit more forward thinking, as well as making sure I'm staying educated and up to date on a lot of different topics, always challenging myself to learn more and really develop my worldview and perspectives, and really challenging myself and my mind. I also have a standard of being more self-disciplined. We working on that one. And the final one I'll share is a standard of cleanliness and hygiene. So keeping a clean space, making sure I look put together and look my best and meet the standards I set for my own personal appearance. And when I do look better, I feel better and I do better. So honestly, just really investing in that, and even just learning how to do my hair and makeup in better ways so that I feel more confident in my appearance, because there's no better feeling than when you love your outfit, you love your hair, you love your makeup. I feel like I'm really just ready to seize the day. So that's something I want to get better at, and investing some time and learning and really discovering, like, what is my signature scent? What is my signature hairstyle? What is my go-to makeup look? Really spending the time to explore those things and also being a little bit more creative in those areas. Throughout this episode, I think I've come to the conclusion that having high standards isn't a bad thing, but I do think there needs to be a way for you to keep yourself in check and make sure that your high standards aren't shielding you from things rather than being helpful. I also want us to be aware and identify where our standards are actually shielding us from experiencing different emotions like fear. A good example of this is always seeking perfection. Having the standard that everything needs to be perfect isn't actually effective. Instead, I think it just hinders progress. And oftentimes, sometimes we use like a high standard of like, oh, this logo isn't up to snuff, it's not good enough. When in actuality, it's just us shielding ourselves from a fear of failure or maybe even a fear of vulnerability or putting yourself out there. So, really make sure you understand what ways your standards are actually shielding you from feeling an emotion or doing something. Another thing is sometimes I think people's standards can actually block them from developing deep, real relationships. So, as I said, make sure that your deal breakers are actually rooted in values so that it's not shielding you from opening up and being vulnerable and developing true relationships. The next way I think your standards can maybe block progress is they can be your ego in disguise. I have found that sometimes people use their high standards to position themselves as superior or better at something and try and impose that standard on you as a way to morally criticize you. And I know that came off as somewhat kind of elusive, but I'm thinking of a situation where there was someone who used their standards as a way of like saying, I would never live my life that way. You need to raise your standards and raise your bar, and you need to better yourself morally, just be a better person. But in actuality, I think this is just a way to fuel their ego rather than actually trying to help someone, especially when it's unsolicited and just like out of left field in an argument. And the last pitfall I feel like people fall into is having standards that are externally imposed. And I think this happens a lot with beauty. And it's hard not to, especially when the world has its own view of what's beautiful. And it's difficult not to internalize that. But I do really want people to stop falling for other people's standards and tune out the noise and come up with your own definition of what's beautiful and try and meet that instead of trying to follow trends and follow what the world is saying you should do or look like. Something I've been trying to do is really lean into looking the best for myself. And what that means is I'm not going to overanalyze my face. I'm not going to overanalyze my body. I am trying to have what I think looks the best for my own frame, whether that's clothing, whether that's fitness goals. Instead of trying to look a certain way or look like other people, really tap into what I like because I have my own personal style. So make sure I align with that. Wear clothes that flatter my body type and focus on fitness goals rather than just appearance goals. So overall, I hope this episode was helpful. And what I've come to realize after talking through all this with you all is that most people don't lower their standards because they actually want less. They lower them because they're afraid of being alone, afraid of seeming difficult, or just tired of waiting. I think we should work to be okay with these uncomfortable emotions and putting ourselves out there instead of lowering our standards. And honestly, I'd make a case for having high standards because I think when rooted in values, they actually improve your life. They force you to better yourself. They force you to, in turn, not put up with bad behavior and bad people, and instead forces you to grow into the version of yourself that can actually have the things you want. And it makes space and room for opportunities and people that align with you. So I think you just need to keep asking and checking and make sure that you stay committed to the life that you actually want and not settling. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please actually leave me some of the standards and preferences that you have in life. I'm actually curious to hear. And as always, if you're feeling generous, please subscribe, leave a comment, like all the things. And I will catch you in the next episode. Bye.